In the darkness above Tokyo, an Airbus descended through winter air. 379 passengers, 12 crew members, 8 infants. Every single one of them would survive. At 17:47 local time, the aircraft touched down at Haneda Airport. It had already been cleared to land. The runway was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. The wheels made contact, reverse thrust engaged. Then came an impact no one had been expecting. Not violent enough to feel catastrophic, but wrong. Deeply wrong. Beneath the fuselage, fuel ignited. Flames spread along the left wing. Heat radiated through the cabin floor. Smoke began moving through the ventilation system. Passengers turned to their windows. The engine was burning. Children began to cry. Some passengers shouted. Others sat frozen, trying to understand what they were seeing. The emergency exits remained closed. The public address system was silent. The intercom was unresponsive. The flight attendants stood at their assigned positions, waiting. They were trained not to move without cockpit authorization. Inside the cockpit, the captain had seconds to understand what just happened. The aircraft was no longer responding normally. Something had been struck on the runway, something substantial. Behind them, approximately 1 kilometer back along runway 34 right, another aircraft was already being consumed by fire. A Japan Coast Guard de Havilland Dash 8. 5 crew members would not survive. Its captain, injured but conscious, would later tell investigators he believed he had permission to take off. The transcript would suggest otherwise. And between those two realities, clearance and belief, lies the question that defines this accident. Because at 17:47, this was not supposed to be possible. Haneda Airport is one of the busiest and most tightly controlled airports in the world. Multiple runways, advanced ground radar, runway incursion alarms, stop bar lights designed specifically to prevent unauthorized entry. Layer upon layer of defense. And yet, for 68 seconds before impact, a warning system was already active. No intervention came. By the time anyone could react, the Airbus was committed to landing. Closing speed, over 120 knots. At night, on a runway that should have been clear. Japan Airlines Flight 516 had departed New Chitose Airport near Sapporo at 16:27 local time. Destination, Tokyo Haneda. Flight time, approximately 80 minutes. The aircraft was an Airbus A350-900. Registration, Juliet Alpha 1 3 X-Ray Juliet. 2 years old, among the most technologically advanced wide-body aircraft in commercial service. 3 flight deck crew commanded the aircraft. 9 cabin crew managed the cabin. 367 passengers filled the seats. Business travellers returning after the New Year holiday. Families completing winter trips. A 17-year-old Swedish exchange student, Anton Debe, heading back to his host family in Tokyo. 8 infants travelled with their parents. Routine, predictable. And that predictability is what makes what happened next so difficult to accept. Haneda Airport was operating near peak capacity. 4 runways, dozens of simultaneous ground movements, arrivals sequenced within minutes of one another. This is not unusual for Haneda, it is designed for it. The approach into runway 34 right was textbook. Weather, clear. Visibility, more than 10 kilometers. Winds, light and steady. At 17:43, Tokyo Tower cleared the Airbus to continue its approach. Continue your approach to runway 34 right, the captain acknowledged. 2 minutes later came the final instruction. Runway 34 right, no landing hindrance. No landing hindrance. That phrase carries weight. It means the runway is confirmed clear. It means no vehicle, no aircraft, no obstruction is present. It means the layered defences have done their job. At 17:47, the main landing gear contacted the runway. The initial sensation was normal. Rumble, nose wheel lowering, reverse thrust engaging. Then something changed. Not a violent collision, Not an explosion, a heavy, unnatural shudder, as though the aircraft had rolled over something that should not have been there. Inside the cockpit, the captain felt the aircraft deviate subtly from its centerline. Control inputs required correction. This was no routine touchdown. One passenger seated on the right side turned to look out the window. The left engine was burning. Not smoke, not vapour, flame. Behind them, approximately 1,000 metres down the runway, a smaller aircraft was already being consumed by post-impact fire. A Japan Coast Guard de Havilland -8, registration Juliet Alpha 722 Alpha. It had been scheduled for a humanitarian mission, earthquake relief supplies bound for Niigata Prefecture. The third such mission of the day. Its captain, 39-year-old Genki Miyamoto, survived the collision with serious injuries. 5 other crew members did not. But inside the Airbus, none of that context was known. The passengers knew only heat. Smoke began entering the cabin through the ventilation system. Children cried. Some passengers shouted instructions to one another. Others remained silent, waiting for direction. The public address system was inoperative. The intercom between cockpit and cabin had failed. The cabin crew stood at their stations, trained to wait for command authorization before opening any exit. And in that moment, training competed with instinct. Opening a door into visible fire can accelerate combustion. It can turn survivable conditions into fatal ones within seconds. Waiting too long can have the same result. In the cockpit, the captain assessed what he could see. The aircraft had come to a stop on the grass apron beside the runway. The left side showed visible flame. The right side appeared temporarily clear. He attempted to make a cabin announcement. No response. He tried the interphone. Dead. The collision had disabled multiple communication systems. For several seconds, cockpit and cabin operated without coordination. In aviation, seconds matter. In fire, they matter more. Then a backup light connected. A senior flight attendant reached the cockpit through an alternate communication channel. "We are on fire. We need permission to open the doors." The captain evaluated the exterior again. He authorized evacuation, and at that moment the outcome shifted. Because what followed would determine whether 379 people walked away or not. The transcripts tell one version of events. The survivors describe another. The physical evidence suggests a third. At 17:43 and 26 seconds, Tokyo Tower contacted the Coast Guard aircraft. JA 722 Alpha, taxi to holding point Charlie 5, number 1. The instruction was acknowledged. Taxi to holding point Charlie 5, number 1. Charlie 5 is a holding position, not the runway, a clearly marked threshold where aircraft stop and wait for explicit takeoff clearance. Number 1 does not mean cleared for departure, it means next in sequence. This distinction is not subtle, it is foundational. Commercial pilots are trained to treat runway entry as sacred space. You do not cross without explicit clearance. Yet, at 17:47, the -8 was on runway 34 right, not taxiing parallel, not holding short, on the active runway. And for approximately 40 seconds it remained there, stationary, visible. That 40-second window is one of the most important facts in this investigation.
40 seconds does not sound long. In aviation, it is measurable.
It is the length of an entire landing roll for smaller aircraft. It is enough time for a controller to issue multiple transmissions. It is enough time for a flight crew on final approach to receive a go-around instruction, advance thrust levers, retract flaps in stages, and climb away safely. The -8 did not cross and immediately clear. It did not hesitate at the edge and retreat. It entered the runway environment and stopped. Whether the crew believed takeoff clearance was imminent or believed it had already been given, the aircraft remained in position. Meanwhile, the Airbus A350 was descending through approximately 200 feet above ground level. At that altitude, the aircraft is stabilised. Landing checklist complete. Auto thrust managing speed. Pilots focused outside. Monitoring alignment. Monitoring descent rate. Expecting a routine touchdown. Inside the control tower, Haneda's surface movement radar system detected the Dash 8 entering runway 34 right. When this occurs without clearance, the runway incursion alert activates. This is not subtle. A visual indicator appears on the controller's display. An audible alert is generated. The purpose is immediate intervention. The alarm activated. It remained active for 68 seconds. 68 seconds. To understand that number, consider what normally happens when a controller detects a potential runway conflict. The transmission is short. JAL 516, go around. 2 words, no explanation required. The Airbus crew would immediately advance thrust levers to take off power, pitch up, climb straight ahead, retract flaps incrementally, re-enter the traffic pattern. A go-around at low altitude is not unusual. It is trained repeatedly. It is procedural. It is safe. All of that can begin within seconds of hearing the command. The A350, at approximately 120 knots over the runway threshold, would have required only seconds to re-establish climb. The system is designed precisely for that scenario. But no such instruction was transmitted. During those 68 seconds, the Dash 8 remained on the runway. The Airbus continued descending. The alert remained active. The controller later stated he did not notice the Dash 8's runway entry. Haneda was operating at high capacity, arrivals sequenced tightly, departures staged, ground vehicles moving. Controllers scanned continuously between radar display, flight progress strips, and out the window visual confirmation. Attention is distributed. When workload increases, cognitive bandwidth narrows. This does not imply negligence. It illustrates a phenomenon well studied in human factors research: task saturation. When multiple inputs compete simultaneously, detection of a single anomaly can be delayed. Alarm fatigue compounds this effect. If alert systems generate frequent low-level warnings, operators can subconsciously downgrade urgency. The alert functions, the system performs, but the human response becomes the variable. The critical point is this: the runway incursion alert did not fail. It activated exactly as designed. What failed was the chain between alert and intervention, and during that 68-second interval, the Airbus descended from a safe, recoverable altitude to the point of no return. By the time the A350 crossed the runway threshold, a go-around would have required aggressive manoeuvring at low altitude. Seconds later, impact occurred. The transcript shows no urgency, no raised voices, no abrupt correction, just standard phraseology until the collision. The transcript says, "Taxi to holding point." The captain says, "I believed I had permission." The alarm says, "Runway incursion for 68 seconds." The stop bar lights say nothing, because they were dark. Each element tells the truth, and yet none, by itself, explains the outcome. And that is where the investigation becomes more complicated. Because when every safeguard partially functions, but none fully intervenes, the system does not fail loudly. It fails quietly, until impact. But impact was not the final outcome. It was the beginning of a second test. Because once the safeguards failed on the runway, a different system had to take over. Not radar, not stop bars, not alarms. Human execution. And in the minutes that followed, the question was no longer how the collision occurred. It was whether 379 people would survive what came next. The Airbus had come to rest on the grass apron beside the runway. The left side of the aircraft showed visible flame. The right side appeared temporarily clear. Smoke was thickening inside the cabin. Heat radiated upward through the floor panels. The public address system was inoperative. The intercom between cockpit and cabin had failed. Cabin crew members could not coordinate with one another. They could not receive instructions from the flight deck. They could only assess what they could see. And what they could see was fire. The evacuation certification standard for commercial aircraft is 90 seconds. All passengers and crew off the aircraft using half the available exits in under a minute and a half. Japan Airlines Flight 516 would take 18 minutes. On paper, that is a failure of the benchmark. In reality, it is something else entirely. The Airbus A350 is equipped with 8 emergency exits, 4 on the left, 4 on the right, each fitted with dual-lane evacuation slides. But within moments of impact, 5 of those 8 exits were unusable. The left side was exposed to active fire. Opening those doors would have directed passengers directly into heat and smoke. 2 of the right side exits were obstructed by external conditions and debris. That left 3 viable exits. 3. For 379 people. Every decision now carried consequence. At the forward exits, flight attendants assessed the outside environment before arming the slides. They were trained to check for visible fire, trained to evaluate wind direction, trained to delay if conditions outside were unsurvivable. Delay too long and smoke becomes fatal. Open too soon and flame becomes fatal. There was no intercom to confirm strategy. Each section of the cabin operated independently. In the rear of the aircraft, one flight attendant stood at door 4 left. Passengers were shouting, smoke was building, heat intensified along the fuselage. Through the small viewing window, she could see flame movement outside. She waited, not out of hesitation, out of training. If oxygen rushed inward toward active fire, the cabin could flash over. She monitored the fire's direction. She assessed the airflow. She made a calculation. 8 minutes after impact, she opened the door. The slide deployed. Passengers began evacuating through the rear exit. At the forward doors, evacuation was already underway. Passengers moved quickly, but not chaotically. No one retrieved luggage. Not one overhead bin was opened. Every carry-on remained in place. This detail matters. Luggage slows evacuation. It injures people on slides. It blocks aisles. Here, it did not. Some observers would later credit cultural discipline. Others would credit effective safety briefings. Perhaps both. But in that moment, fear clarified priorities. Survival over possessions. 2 off-duty airline employees, seated among the passengers, assisted at the rear. They guided people through smoke-filled aisles. They stabilized the slide area. They helped maintain flow. This was not coordinated by cockpit command. It was spontaneous. Inside the cabin, visibility decreased as smoke accumulated. The composite carbon fiber fuselage of the A350 resisted fire penetration longer than traditional aluminium structures might have. This is not speculation. Post-accident analysis showed the cabin remained structurally intact for several critical minutes. Those minutes became margin. Passengers continued descending the slides. Some stumbled, some were assisted. Some shielded children from falling debris. 18 minutes after impact, the last cabin crew member exited the aircraft. The captain remained on board. He conducted a final sweep of the cabin, row by row, verifying no one remained. He exited through the rear door. Seconds later, flames breached deeper into the cabin. The aircraft would ultimately be destroyed by post-impact fire. 379 people survived. 14 sustained minor injuries. 1 suffered a fractured rib. No passenger fatalities. For comparison, similar post-impact fire events in aviation history have resulted in catastrophic loss of life within minutes. This did not. Because in a scenario where multiple safety layers had already failed, one final layer held: execution under pressure. The runway incursion should not have happened. The alarm should have triggered intervention. The stop bars should have been illuminated. But once collision occurred, a new system took over. Training, decision-making, discipline, and time purchased by aircraft design that should not have been available, but was. The outcome now appears almost inevitable in hindsight. It was not. At any point in those 18 minutes, panic could have altered the trajectory. A door opened into flame, luggage clogging an aisle, a delayed decision, a failed slide. Any one of those variables shifts the outcome dramatically. They did not. And that is why this accident occupies a strange place in aviation history. It was a catastrophic collision, and simultaneously, an evacuation success story. The evacuation ended without passenger fatalities. That outcome is extraordinary, but it does not answer the central question: how did two aircraft occupy the same runway? Because survival does not erase causality, it only postpones accountability. The official record confirms certain facts. Japan Airlines Flight 516 was cleared to land. The Coast Guard Dash 8 was instructed to taxi to holding point Charlie 5 and informed it was number 1 for departure. No explicit takeoff clearance was issued in the published transcript. The Dash 8 entered the runway regardless. The runway incursion alarm activated. It remained active for 68 seconds. No go-around was instructed. These facts are stable. What is less stable are the gaps between them. The Coast Guard cockpit voice recorder was recovered from the wreckage. Its contents have not been publicly released beyond limited excerpts. We know the captain survived. We know he later stated he believed he had permission to depart. We do not know what was said inside that cockpit in the seconds before the aircraft entered runway 34 right. Was there internal disagreement? Did one pilot question the clearance? Did both interpret the instruction the same way? In aviation investigations, the cockpit voice recorder is often the final arbiter of ambiguity. Here, it remains partially silent. The Japan Airlines A350's cockpit voice recorder was not recovered. The post-impact fire destroyed it. Flight data was preserved. Communications with air traffic control were preserved. But the unfiltered cockpit conversation during the final seconds before landing is gone. We did not know what the crew saw. We did not know when they first perceived an obstruction. We did not know whether a split-second rejection was considered. We reconstruct those moments from interviews. Interviews are valuable. They are not recordings. There is also the matter of frequency coordination. One theory suggests the Coast Guard aircraft may have remained tuned to ground control when tower communications were being issued. If so, the crew may not have heard the landing clearance given to the Airbus. If they did not hear it, they may have believed the runway environment was clear. But this theory introduces another question. Standard procedure requires aircraft to monitor tower frequency before entering an active runway. If the frequency had not been changed, why? If it had been changed, why was the landing clearance not registered as conflicting? Either the crew misunderstood the instruction, or they lacked critical situational information. Neither explanation is comfortable. Because both scenarios point towards something more subtle than error. They point toward cognition. In aviation, clearances are not interpreted in isolation. They are interpreted in context. When a crew is told they are number 1, it establishes expectation. Expectation shapes perception. This is known as expectation bias, the tendency to interpret information in a way that confirms what one already anticipates. If a crew believes they are next for departure, ambiguous phrasing may register as confirmation rather than instruction. Taxi to holding point Charlie 5, number 1. Technically precise, procedurally correct, but cognitively loaded. Under time pressure, the brain often fills gaps with assumed continuity. If the crew expected imminent takeoff clearance, the holding instruction may have been processed as a transitional step rather than a boundary. There is also the dynamic inside the cockpit itself. Commercial aviation operates with clearly defined authority structures. The captain holds final decision-making authority. The first officer monitors and cross-checks. In high workload environments, however, authority gradient can subtly influence challenge behaviour. If a captain interprets an instruction as clearance to proceed, the first officer must decide whether to question that interpretation. In most modern cockpit cultures, Challenge and response is encouraged, but hesitation can occur, especially if the instruction appears routine, especially if no immediate contradiction is obvious. Add to this the possibility of frequency coordination ambiguity. If the Coast Guard aircraft remained tuned to ground control while tower communications were being issued, situational awareness would narrow. The crew would hear their own taxi instruction. They might not hear landing clearance given to the Airbus. Without that information, the runway may have appeared operationally available. Human cognition under workload does not degrade dramatically. It narrows. Attention becomes selective. Peripheral information is deprioritized. Controllers experience similar cognitive narrowing. When traffic density increases, scanning patterns accelerate. Visual confirmation competes with radar monitoring. Alerts compete with ongoing transmissions. Research in human factors consistently shows that when systems rely on human monitoring of automated alerts, detection delay increases as workload rises. The alert may function perfectly, the human response may not. None of this requires recklessness, none of it requires negligence. It requires only small interpretive shifts under pressure, a clearance interpreted slightly forward of its intended boundary, an alert processed a few seconds later than ideal, a frequency confirmation assumed rather than verified, individually minor, collectively consequential. Aviation safety is built on precision language because language leaves little room for assumption. But even precise language must pass through human cognition, and cognition is not binary. It is influenced by expectation, workload, authority, and environment. Which means the uncomfortable reality is this: the transcript can be correct, the captain's belief can be sincere, the controller's alert can activate, and still the system can move forward toward impact. Then there are the stop bar lights. They had been non-functional for 6 days. 6 days at one of the busiest airports in the world. Stop bars are not cosmetic features. They are physical barriers designed to interrupt exactly this scenario. Why were they still unrepaired? Maintenance backlog? Parts availability? Prioritization decisions? Public reports confirm the outage. They do not detail the delay. When layered defenses degrade quietly, risk accumulates invisibly. And then there is the runway incursion alarm. It activated. It remained active for more than a minute. The controller later stated he was managing multiple aircraft and did not notice the Dash 8's runway entry. Alarm fatigue is a documented phenomenon. When systems generate frequent alerts, operators can become desensitized. But desensitization does not remove responsibility. It complicates it. Because if an alert is technically functioning, but not operationally effective, is the safeguard intact or already compromised? The Dash 8 was equipped with Mode S transponder capability. It was not equipped with ADS-B. ADS-B provides more precise positional data to ground systems and other aircraft. Would ADS-B have materially changed the outcome? Investigators have not conclusively stated that it would have, but in layered safety architecture, precision matters. Each of these elements, stop bars, alarms, frequency monitoring, positional tracking, performed partially. None intervened completely. And when systems are built on redundancy, partial performance can create a dangerous illusion of protection, because everything appears functional, until it isn't. What makes this accident difficult to categorize is not malice, it is alignment. Multiple minor degradations aligning in the same 68-second window. A holding instruction interpreted differently, a light unlit, an alarm unheard, a descent path unaltered. Individually survivable, collectively catastrophic. The system did not collapse, it thinned, and in that thinning, the margin disappeared. Accidents in aviation are rarely the result of a single failure. They are sequences, one event exposing the weakness of another. Japan Airlines Flight 516 did not collide with the Coast Guard Dash 8, because a single rule was ignored. It collided because multiple safeguards degraded quietly and aligned. A holding instruction interpreted differently, stop bar lights that were dark, a runway incursion alarm that activated but did not interrupt, a descent clearance issued to a runway that appeared clear. None of these elements alone guarantees disaster. Together, they removed margin, and aviation depends on margin.
The margin between interpretation and instruction, between alert and response, between visibility and assumption, between redundancy and reliance. When margin shrinks, the system does not announce it. It continues operating. Flights depart, aircraft land, controllers manage traffic. Passengers board, believing the structure above them is absolute. And most of the time, it is. That is what makes this accident instructive rather than extraordinary.
Haneda Airport is not an outlier. It is one of the most technologically advanced airports in the world. Japan Airlines is not an inexperienced operator. Its training programs are widely respected. The Coast Guard crew was not reckless. They were conducting a humanitarian mission. The controller was not negligent. He was managing high-density traffic in peak season. Yet 5 people died. 379 survived. Not because the system was flawless, but because when the outer layers failed, the inner layers held. Training held. Discipline held. Aircraft design held. Execution under pressure held. But that outcome should not obscure the warning. Because the warning is not about this specific runway or this specific night. It is about silent degradation. Stop bars can remain unrepaired for days. Alarms can become background noise. Procedural language can be technically correct and operationally ambiguous. Frequency changes can be assumed rather than confirmed. Each deviation small, each one explainable, until alignment makes them inseparable. Aviation is designed around the belief that one mistake should not be fatal. Here, more than one mistake aligned. And the only reason this accident is remembered as a survival story is because the final defensive layer, human execution under pressure, functioned exactly as trained. The investigation will refine procedures, perhaps reinforce explicit hold short phraseology, perhaps accelerate maintenance prioritization for stop bar systems, perhaps evaluate alert presentation in control towers, perhaps expand ADS-B requirements. These changes will matter, they will reduce probability, but they will not eliminate alignment, because no system removes human interpretation, no system removes workload, no system removes the possibility that multiple small degradations can exist simultaneously. And so the lesson is not that aviation is fragile, it is that aviation is resilient, until it is stretched thin. On January 2nd, it was stretched thin. Thin enough for 2 aircraft to occupy the same runway. Thin enough for an alarm to sound for 68 seconds without intervention. Thin enough for 5 lives to be lost. But not thin enough to take 379 more. And that distinction matters, because it reveals something essential. The system did not collapse, it narrowed. And in that narrowing, every remaining safeguard became critical. Some failed, some did not. The difference between catastrophe and survivability was measured not in miles, not in minutes, but in margins. Margins that can shrink quietly. Margins that can thin without warning. Margins that must be protected long before impact.